My online crush tricked me into sending photos by using a picture of our school's heartthrob, Mike Spencer. Playing it cool, I used a classic internet move, no thanks, I'm actually a guy. As expected, there was a long silence before he fired back with a string of question marks, demanding to know who I really was. Figure it out yourself, scammer, I thought smugly. Now, he'd have to live in paranoia every day, wondering who exposed him. But just as I was about to share the story with my roommate, I saw a social media post from the actual Mike Spencer. Who's the idiot pretending to be a girl and messing with my emotions? I froze. Wait. Could my online crush actually be the real Mike? I'd been obsessed with a new matchmaking app recently and quickly hit it off with a guy there. For 2 months, we played games together, chatted endlessly, and bonded over everything under the sun. I didn't know what he looked like, but his voice? Oh, it was pure magic, deep, smooth, and irresistibly charming. I was completely hooked, smiling like an idiot at my phone every day. But some people, like me, fall in love fast and fall out of it just as quickly. Take that one fateful day, for instance. We were having our usual sweet conversation when I noticed he seemed hesitant. He kept typing, then stopping, as if he were debating something. I thought he was about to drop a romantic bombshell. Instead, he hit me with a thunderbolt. I've thought about this for a long time. Let's meet. Before I could even react, he followed up with a photo. And not just any photo. A drop-dead gorgeous photo. But here's the kicker, it was Mike Spencer, our school's heartthrob. I'd seen that picture floating around on our campus confession pages 100 times. And now, this guy was using it to scam me? Seriously? Giving him one last chance, I asked, is this really you? He replied with confidence, of course. 100% genuine. Yeah, right. Our IP addresses weren't even in the same province, let alone the same campus. Mike was probably asleep in his dorm right now, blissfully unaware. Honestly, do scammers not do their homework anymore? I decided to humor him and see where this was going. Sure enough, his next move was to ask for my picture. Could you send me a photo of yourself, too? Pretty please? Complete with a kissing emoji. Scammer confirmed. 2 months of effort, just to blow his cover like this. I almost felt bad for him. Without hesitation, I pulled out the classic line, no thanks, I'm actually a guy. The response was instant, a rapid-fire barrage of question marks. I could practically hear the panic through the screen. Who are you? Not telling you, buddy. Enjoy second-guessing every chat you've ever had. How could you deceive me like this? Are you laughing at me? I laughed until my stomach hurt. Oh, the irony. Did he feel this humiliated when he was busy scamming others? Before I could deliver a lesson on honesty, though, he blocked me. It seems he ran off pretty quickly. Oh well, I'll just chalk this up to 2 months wasted. Just as I was about to share the drama of my failed online romance with my roommate, she walked in, scrolling on her phone. Hey, she said, looking puzzled. Have you seen Mike's social media? Looks like he got scammed in an online relationship or something. My heart sank. Trembling, I grabbed her phone. And then I almost passed out. No, actually, I froze on the spot, completely petrified, my mind a blank void. Because there it was, Mike's post, screaming at the world, who's the jerk pretending to be a girl and messing with my feelings? Don't make me hunt you down. And just to make things worse? He attached screenshots of our chat. The tone, the audacity, it was unmistakably me. Oh. My God. Could it be? My online crush was really Mike? I sat on the couch for a full 30 seconds, swallowing hard as I replayed every awful thing I'd just said to him in my mind. Oh no. I'm an idiot. I thought he was some sleazy scammer, and I'd torn into him without holding back. From his perspective, though? 2 months of online dating only to be told it was all a cruel prank by a guy? And worse, he might think I'd expose him to the entire internet. The emotional trauma. I'm a terrible person. Panicking, I opened Instagram to try and clear up the mess, but then I remembered I'd also blocked him in a fit of rage. And I didn't even remember his handle. Desperate, I logged into the game app where we'd first met. The moment I signed in, a glaring notification greeted me: your partner has ended the relationship. His username had been updated, to a heartbroken fool. At least the platform allowed messages between strangers. Taking a deep breath, I sent him a tentative apology gif. No response. But it showed as read. There was hope. I quickly typed out, "I'm sorry for going too far. I can explain everything." Finally, a reply. Tentative but wounded, what else do you have to say? Even through the screen, I could feel his hurt. My guilt deepened. At least he was willing to hear me out. I began typing out my heartfelt apology, determined to clear up the misunderstanding. But just as I hit send, my internet died. Seriously? I tried resending the messages over and over, only to watch them spin in an endless loading loop. Frustrated, I typed, "This signal is stupid." And wouldn't you know it, that was the only message that went through. No explanation. No apology. Just stupid. Fantastic. I considered taking a screenshot to prove I was talking about my network, not him, but, yeah, no internet for that either. By the time my connection finally came back, I saw Mike's message: "Great. Just great. I can't believe I fell for it again. I'll never trust you." And then he logged off. No matter what I sent after that, he didn't reply. I think I just made everything worse. It looked like he was about to uninstall the game. I'm doomed. Completely doomed. Not only did I mess with him, but I also insulted him. I'm done for. Ever since Mike stopped talking to me, I'd been walking around in a fog of guilt. I mean, how could I have known my online crush was actually a classmate? The world is so big, yet somehow, he ended up meeting me, the unluckiest person alive. For days, I tried messaging him in the game, but he never replied. I didn't dare send him a friend request either. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, one of my elective courses started. I was dragging myself to class, flipping through my book half-heartedly, when my roommate suddenly jabbed me in the side. "Whoa. Look, Mike's in this class too," she whispered. "What?" I glanced up, and sure enough, there he was, his perfect, sculpture-like face in full view. But this particular sculpture looked very pissed off, his brows were furrowed, his whole demeanor screaming, "Don't mess with me." I immediately ducked my head, heart racing. Sure, he hadn't seen my photo, but I couldn't help feeling guilty. Of course, the more you want to avoid something, the more fate insists on throwing it in your face. The professor called on me to answer a question. Well, Mike had heard my voice before. He probably thought it was some kind of voice changer prank back then, but it wasn't. If I spoke now, he'd recognize me for sure. Under the weight of everyone's gaze, I had no choice but to bite the bullet and answer. Sure enough, as soon as I opened my mouth, Mike's head snapped around to look at me. I stared straight at the professor, pretending not to notice, but I could feel his eyes boring into me. My voice trembled as I finished. When I finally sat back down, my roommate leaned over, curious. "Why are you so nervous?" I just waved her off and stared at the ceiling, feeling like my doom was sealed. As soon as class ended, I tried to make a quick exit, but Mike was faster. He stepped in front of me, blocking my path. I veered left, he blocked me again. I tried the other side, same result. I practically buried my head in my chest, desperate to avoid eye contact. Meanwhile, my oblivious roommate kept poking me. "Do you guys know each other?" Mike let out a low chuckle, leaned in close, and said through gritted teeth, "What do you think, bro?" I could feel his breath on my face. Mike was so close, it was like he wouldn't stop until I looked at him. My face was burning, bright red, but not from embarrassment. It was pure anxiety. My palms were sweating, and my mind was racing. Just as I was spiraling, Mike straightened up, and I realized just how tall he was. "Don't you think you owe me an explanation, bro?" His voice was cold, sending a chill down my spine. I froze, panic welling up inside me. The worst part? I have this awful habit of crying when I get too worked up. So instead of looking him in the eye, I bent at the waist and started apologizing profusely, hoping to defuse the situation. This kind of groveling was second nature to me. I'd been apologizing my way out of trouble since I was a kid. But the more nervous I got, the harder it was to speak. I could feel tears stinging the corners of my eyes, and I fought desperately to hold them back. "Damn it, don't cry. Don't cry." There were so many people around. If I broke down, everyone would think he was bullying me. I couldn't make things worse for him. Not after everything I'd already put him through. He seemed to notice something unusual. After a moment of hesitation, he crouched down in front of me, tilting his head as his tone softened. "Why won't you look at me? Am I that scary?" "Not at all. It's just that I hadn't put on any makeup today, and if I made eye contact with him now, I'd definitely cry. That'd be way too embarrassing." The classroom, likely hosting another session soon, was already attracting a small crowd of onlookers. I could feel their curious gazes and hear whispers buzzing around us. Mike clearly noticed too. He lowered his voice and said, "Follow me. Don't get lost." Then, under everyone's watchful eyes, he grabbed my hand and led me out of the classroom. As we exited, I could hear the crowd erupt into cheers and applause. Someone even shouted, "Go, Mike." Lily, my roommate, was practically vibrating with excitement, giving me a thumbs up and mouthing, "You're amazing. Kill me now. I'll never live this down." My mind was spinning. I had no idea how long Mike had been dragging me along before he finally sat me down on a bench. Still overwhelmed, I bit my lip, took a deep breath, and forced myself to steady my trembling voice. Then I spilled everything. "I'm so sorry, Mike. I thought you were a scammer. I didn't mean any of it, really." To back myself up, I pulled out my phone and showed him our chat history, explaining how my network connection had failed during my attempt to apologize. The second time, I tried to explain, but the signal was awful. None of my messages went through. My voice was shaky despite my best efforts to control it, and I could feel my emotions spiraling. I kept stumbling over my words, trying to get it all out, while Mike stayed quiet the entire time. Was he still mad? Did he not believe me? I risked a glance up at him, only to meet his deep, piercing gaze. Startled, I quickly looked away, but my heart skipped a beat. "I swear, I'm telling the truth." Before I could finish, he reached out with a tissue in hand. He paused, hesitating, but then gently dabbed at my face, wiping away my tears. "I believe you," he said softly. "So no more crying, okay? The thing about me is that whenever someone tries to comfort me while I'm on the verge of tears, it just makes me cry harder." And sure enough, the waterworks started up again. Mike looked alarmed, crouching down beside me and awkwardly patting my back. "It's okay," he murmured gently. His voice, so calm and familiar, reminded me of our online chats. Back then, whenever I was upset, he'd always send soothing voice messages to cheer me up. I didn't know how long I cried, but eventually, the tears slowed, and I managed to regain some composure. Mike's hand was empty, he'd gone through an entire pack of tissues on me. He used his hand to brush away the last of my tears and asked softly, "Feeling better now?" God, this was humiliating. I'd come here to apologize, and somehow it had turned into this. Turning my head to avoid his gaze, I tried to sound tougher than I felt. "I told you before, online, that I have this crying issue. It's not like I wanted to cry." Worried he might not believe me, I added, "I'm actually really tough." Who would have thought Mike would laugh? His lips curved into a handsome smile as he wiped the remaining tears from the corner of my eye. "Yes, you're very tough. After all, how else could you be called strong little pig?" That was my online username, a random, meaningless nickname I'd picked. It was fine in the virtual world, but hearing it come out of Mike's mouth in real life? Mortifying. Before I could say anything, he raised a brow and said, "Now that you're done crying, let's talk business." Business? What else was there to talk about? I'd just explained everything. Still crouching on the ground, Mike tilted his head up to look at me, a sly smile playing on his lips. "So, my online girlfriend turned into my bro, how do you plan to make it up to me?" I was stunned, unable to process what he meant. Before I could figure it out, he added, "How about compensating me with a girlfriend?" Then, without skipping a beat, he whipped out his phone and held it out to me. "Start by giving me your number." Scrambling to grab my phone, I handed it over. But wait, something didn't feel quite right about this exchange. "Let's reintroduce ourselves," he said with a grin. "I'm Mike Jean." There was laughter in his eyes as he continued, "Your online boyfriend. Don't you have anything to say to me?" Oh, so this was my cue to share my info? That made sense. It was only fair to properly introduce myself. "I'm Selena Chase," I replied. After thinking for a moment, it felt like something was missing. Wanting to show my sincerity, I added, "I'll send you my resume later. It's more detailed." Now that was thorough. How much more earnest could I get? As soon as the words left my mouth, Mike's expression shifted, he looked utterly perplexed. For a moment, he just stared at me, his gaze unreadable, before finally letting out a resigned laugh. "You're going to send me your resume?" "Of course," I said, nodding earnestly. "Isn't that the fastest way to get to know someone? It's efficient, honest, and impossible to fake." Mike looked like he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He sighed and said, "Forget it. That's not what I wanted to hear." When I asked him what he meant, he refused to elaborate. Instead, he motioned for me to come closer, his expression unreadable. My heart raced as I hesitated. It hit me then, we really did share some sort of romantic connection, as much as I'd tried to deny it. We were already close, but now he was asking me to come even closer. Could this be what I thought it was? Was it happening this soon? After a brief pause, he asked, "Can I hold your arm for a second?" My mind spiraled. Was he about to hold my hand? How was I supposed to react? I had zero experience with this sort of thing. Wait, he'd already held my hand earlier, why was he suddenly being so formal now? Blushing furiously, I nodded. As he leaned in closer, my nerves went into overdrive. Then, in one swift motion, he grabbed my arm, used it to haul himself upright, and plopped down in the chair beside me with a pained expression. "My legs fell asleep from squatting," he grumbled. It took me a second to register what had just happened. So much for my wild imagination. Turns out, even the most handsome man in the world is still human, and still gets leg cramps. Mike walked me to the dorm entrance, before heading off. I stood there watching his retreating figure, feeling like I was in a dream. The person I'd been online dating for 2 months turned out to be Mike. And even after everything, he wasn't that angry. In fact, was he kind of happy? Was it just me, or did he smile a lot today? He seemed like a completely different person from the brooding stone sculpture in class earlier. It wasn't until he disappeared from view that I finally began reflecting on everything that had happened between us. Slowly, I headed upstairs. The moment I opened the door to my dorm, I was nearly startled out of my skin. Lily was perched on a chair like a sentinel, blocking the center of the room. When she saw me, her face lit up with a "finally salvation has arrived" expression. "Spill every single detail. You went and secretly met Mike without telling me?" I raised my hands in surrender, trying to appease her. Under her relentless interrogation, I finally caved and told her the whole story of my online relationship with Mike. Lily's jaw dropped. "Wait, what? You're telling me you were the one he was ranting about on social media?" I nodded, my face burning with shame. I wished I could disappear into the floor. She burst out laughing. "I can't believe you pulled a prank like that on Mike. No wonder he was losing his mind. It wasn't intentional. I protested weakly. I just saw the IP address and assumed. Lily waved her hand dismissively. Mike's been away for an internship. He only just came back for classes, so of course the IP address was different. Oh. That explained it. Wait, how do you even know all this? I asked, suspicious. Lily smirked, looking smug. My friend's boyfriend is on the basketball team with him. Obviously, I've got all the inside scoop. Wow. Classic Lily. Just as she was about to press me for more juicy details, my phone buzzed. Lily's eyes lit up like a hawk spotting prey, practically burning a hole through my phone with her stare. Under her intense gaze, I opened the message. It was a voice note from Mike. I hit play, and his deep, magnetic voice filled the room. I'll wait for you downstairs tomorrow at noon. I want to take you somewhere. Lily erupted into a series of ear-piercing squeals, practically vibrating with excitement. My face felt like it was on fire. I didn't need a mirror to know it was bright red. While Lily kept cheering and teasing, I froze, unsure how to respond. Should I go? Or not? Honestly, our relationship felt complicated right now. Online, I'd had no problem joking and saying whatever came to mind. But now that we'd transitioned into real life, everything felt different. He was so handsome, almost too perfect, and that realization stirred an unexpected wave of insecurity in me. Lily must have noticed my hesitation because she suddenly stopped squealing and gaped at me in disbelief. Wait, don't tell me you're thinking of not going? Busted. I buried my face in my hands, unconsciously rubbing the scar hidden beneath my bangs. I just don't think I'm good-looking enough, I mumbled. Compared to Mike, who looked like he walked out of a magazine, I felt so ordinary. All day, I hadn't dared to look him in the eye. I kept my head down, avoiding him. People like him were just too dazzling, they made me want to shrink into the shadows. Lily ruffled my hair, indignantly declaring, anyone who dares to call you ugly again is going to have to deal with me. I couldn't help but laugh at her antics. Back when Mike and I were just chatting online, I'd been honest with him about not being conventionally attractive. I even told him about the scar on my forehead, an unsightly mark I'd always been self-conscious about. And what did he say back then? It's just a shell. I don't care. His words had been so reassuring at the time, and that's what gave me the courage to even consider a relationship. After all, it was just an online romance. I never thought it would cross into real life. But today, I'd spent the whole day with my head down, hiding behind my bangs. He hadn't seen the scar yet. What if, when he finally did, he reacted like everyone else? What if he found it scary or repulsive? Sensing my unease, Lily suddenly changed the subject. Hey, let me show you something. With a mischievous grin, she pulled out her phone and opened the school forum. Sure enough, our little scene in the classroom today had been captured and was now the hot topic of discussion. I sucked in a sharp breath as I clicked on the blurry photo with trembling fingers. Luckily, I'd kept my head down the entire time, and the image quality was so poor it was impossible to identify me. Lily pointed at the picture. See this? Look at Mike's smile. Compare that to the storm cloud he was when he first walked into class. Total night and day difference. Her words made me shift my focus to him. Even in a pixelated photo, Mike's charm was undeniable. And she was right, he wasn't just smiling. It was a full-blown grin, his eyes curved like crescent moons, and his little tiger teeth peeking out. I instinctively clutched my chest. My heart was suddenly racing out of control, completely ignoring my commands. Sneaking a glance at the comments section, I saw a flurry of excited reactions. Mike and this girl's size difference gives off major big bad wolf and little white rabbit vibes. Look at how happy he is. He must really like her. They'd better end up together and live happily ever after. I exhaled deeply, finally relaxing a little. Lily gave me a gentle, motherly smile. See? Nobody's saying anything bad about you now. It's all good wishes. Go for it. We're all rooting for you. Don't worry. I've got your back. Anyone who dares badmouth you will have to deal with me. Her kindness made my annoying tears well up again. Just as I was about to thank her, Lily leaned in with a mischievous smirk. Make sure you ace tomorrow. You have to lock Mike down. The tears disappeared in an instant. I rolled my eyes, muttered a quick "got it," and fled to the bathroom to shower before bed. Once I was lying down, my thoughts drifted back to tomorrow. Wait a minute, I'd completely forgotten to reply to his message. Sure, I'd decided to go after talking it through with Lily, but I hadn't actually told him yet. Panicked, I shot up and grabbed my phone, hesitating for ages over what to say. Then, out of nowhere, Mike sent another message. What do you want to say? I nearly dropped my phone. How did he know? Was he just staring at his phone, waiting for me? Or had he somehow noticed I'd been typing on and off? Taking a deep breath, I replied honestly, I forgot to reply earlier. I was just thinking about how to tell you. His response came almost immediately, say whatever you want. I'll always be waiting. My heart skipped a beat. Back when we were dating online, Mike had always been thoughtful. Online, though, I'd had no problem throwing out bold, flirty lines like it was nothing. Now? Forget about it. Still, I bit the bullet and decided to be honest. I did want to go. What time tomorrow? Mike replied immediately, just text me when you wake up. Wake up? How was I supposed to sleep at all? Turns out, I slept like a log. The irony hit me full force the next morning when Lily shook me awake. You've got some nerve, she said, looking exasperated. Mike's been waiting downstairs for who knows how long. That snapped me awake. I quickly grabbed my phone and sent Mike a hesitant message, I'm awake. His reply was almost instant, I'm still on my way. Don't rush, take your time getting ready. Let me know when you're coming down. Still on his way? Lily and I glanced out from the balcony and, sure enough, there he was, standing downstairs. Was he lying just so I wouldn't feel pressured? Lily's gaze darted between Mike and me, her expression softening. Mike's a good one. Nice move. I hurried to get dressed, trying not to make him wait any longer, and texted him, I'm coming down now. As I stepped outside, I spotted Mike. He was a few steps away, walking slowly toward me as if he'd just arrived. The act made me smile to myself. Hurrying down the stairs, I reached him just as he happened to arrive by my side. Mike was dressed casually today, a stark contrast to his edgy, intimidating look from yesterday. He had such a unique presence, his sharp, striking features exuded a certain untouchable intensity. His tall, fair frame, paired with his piercing gaze, gave off the impression of someone not to be trifled with. But his leisurely stride and slightly slouched posture softened that aura, like a big, aloof cat. Did you wait long? I asked. He smiled warmly. Not at all. I just got here. What was with this duality? The cold, untouchable cat suddenly didn't seem like a cat at all, more like the sun melting away the last of winter's frost. I didn't call him out on the fact that I knew he'd been there for a while. Instead, I asked where we were going. Follow me, he said cryptically. Don't get lost. Why was he so worried I'd get lost? Did I seem that prone to wandering off? He made a move to take my hand but paused just before touching it. Is this okay? He asked. That's when it hit me, his personality and his appearance didn't match at all. He looked so confident and commanding, but deep down, he was surprisingly earnest. The first time he held my hand, he hadn't asked for permission. That must have been in the heat of the moment when he wasn't thinking clearly. Now, with his head back on straight, he was careful about such details. I nodded, and he took my hand. His palm was a little warm, and though his expression stayed neutral, I caught the faint upward curve of his lips as he turned away. Mike brought me to a place I'd never been before, a hidden gem of a lake. At noon, the sunlight danced on the water's surface, creating a shimmering, almost magical effect. Early buds dotted the willows lining the shore, swaying gently in the breeze, carrying the unmistakable scent of spring. I closed my eyes, letting the warm wind wash over me. It felt like every part of me was coming alive again. Then I remembered Mike was still next to me. Peeking through one barely opened eye, I found him not looking at the scenery. He was looking at me. I felt a wave of panic as my gaze darted toward the scenery in front of me. Just moments ago, I'd thought the lake was stunning, but now I couldn't even focus on it. My mind was completely occupied with Mike. "Is it beautiful?" I heard Mike ask. Of course, it was. I turned back to him with a smile. Yes. It's gorgeous. He raised an eyebrow, the corners of his lips curving into a satisfied smile. I think so too. Though he was talking about the scenery, his eyes never left me. Feeling self-conscious under his steady gaze, I quickly tried to change the subject. "Why did you suddenly want to bring me here?" Leaning casually against a nearby tree, Mike's eyes twinkled with mischief. "I told you before, didn't I? That I'd bring you here someday." That expression of his jogged my memory. He had once mentioned seeing a couple taking wedding photos and kissing by the lake, saying it looked romantic and beautiful. Back then, I jokingly said he should take me there and recreate the moment for fun. Oh God, why had I been so bold? Mike bent slightly toward me, his tone light and teasing. "What's wrong? Are you embarrassed?" He tilted his head, his expression shifting to one of genuine curiosity. "You're so different from how you are online. You never get embarrassed there." "Oh, come on. Of course it's different. Online, I could fire off flirty lines without a second thought, but here in person, I could barely keep it together." I was just about to explain my shy, timid self when I suddenly felt warmth on my forehead. Mike's hand rested lightly there, his eyes full of concern. "Look up," he said gently. I froze as I realized I felt something trickling down my face. A mortifying thought hit me like a freight train. Am I having a nosebleed? Had I really been so flustered by Mike that I started bleeding? Completely drained of energy, I resigned myself to my fate, letting Mike tend to me while my soul metaphorically left my body. By the time it was all over, both of us had streaks of blood on our clothes. The scene was horrifyingly awkward. Who starts their first date with a nosebleed? Here we were, in this breathtakingly romantic location where couples would normally be hugging and kissing, and instead, I was bleeding in front of the most gorgeous guy I'd ever met. Sneaking a glance at Mike, I caught his gaze directly. We stared at each other for a moment before, almost simultaneously, we burst out laughing. At first, it was just a quiet chuckle, but soon, we were laughing uncontrollably. Tears streamed down my face as the hilarity of the situation fully sank in. Years later, when I'd look back on this moment, I still wouldn't be able to pinpoint exactly why we laughed so hard. But it would remain one of my favorite memories of us. After our laughter finally subsided, I noticed two figures standing nearby. I froze. How long had they been watching? Panicking, I quickly ducked behind Mike, peeking out cautiously. The taller guy looked strikingly similar to Mike, sharing the same sharp, cold features and an effortlessly aloof demeanor. He glanced at us lazily, then smirked. "Looks like the two of you have a great vibe going on," he teased, his voice dripping with amusement. My face flushed crimson. Could this day get any more embarrassing? Mike gave my hand a reassuring squeeze, before patting it twice. His tone, however, was anything but gentle. "Why are you haunting me like a ghost?" he snapped. The tension was immediate, and it felt like sparks might start flying between them. Before anything escalated, a girl next to the guy spoke up. "Frank, why do you two always start fighting the moment you see each other?" Her voice was familiar. I peeked out again and was hit with another wave of embarrassment. It was Amy, Lily's good friend. And that meant the guy with her had to be her boyfriend, the one who played basketball with Mike. According to Lily, he was a big deal on campus too. Up close, His features were softer than Mike's, with a boyish charm that made him look less intense. Amy blinked in surprise when she saw me. Her gaze darted between Mike and me a couple of times before she asked, "Selena? What's going on between you two?" I glanced nervously at Mike, silently pleading for help, but he acted like he didn't notice. Instead, his eyes stayed fixed on me, as if he, too, was curious about how I'd explain this situation. I stammered, trying to find the words, but before I could say anything, Frank chuckled and turned to Amy. "Oh, it's simple. They're brothers," he said, putting deliberate emphasis on the word. "What?" I gaped at him, half suspecting he knew something. Frank casually draped an arm around Amy's shoulders, looking smug as if to say, "I've got a girlfriend, and you don't." Sure enough, Mike's expression darkened instantly. "Frank, I think you're asking for it," he growled. The whole dynamic was confusing. I couldn't make sense of it. Amy, noticing my bewilderment, gave me a quick explanation. "Frank's Mike's cousin. They've been at odds since they were kids," she said with a sigh. Suddenly, things started clicking. Mike had once mentioned online that his cousin was an irritating show-off who loved flaunting his relationships. And now, it turned out to be Amy's boyfriend? What were the odds? Frank, realizing the connection, looked surprised. "Wait, you two know each other?" Amy and I both nodded. Frank raised an eyebrow, then grinned mischievously. "Do you girls have a habit of mistaking people for scammers?" I froze. He knew? But what did he mean by habit? Wasn't I the only one who thought Mike was a scammer? Curious, I turned to Amy, only to notice her cheeks had turned a faint shade of pink. We'll be going now," she stammered, grabbing Frank's arm and tugging him away before I could ask anything. As they walked off, I overheard Frank whisper, "Mike kept accusing me of pretending to be a girl online to mess with him. Like I'd need to. I've got you, how could he possibly compare?" "Alright, I get it. Now let's go," Amy hissed, clearly desperate to escape. Once they were out of sight, I turned to Mike, still feeling flustered. To my surprise, he was already sitting on a nearby bench, his expression unreadable but unmistakably less cheerful than before. Hesitating, I walked over and sat down beside him. We sat there in silence, neither of us saying a word, the air between us thick with unspoken thoughts. The silence was unbearable, so I desperately tried to find something to talk about. "You and Amy seem pretty close," I said tentatively. Mike's expression softened slightly, but he still avoided looking at me. His usual playful smile was gone, replaced by a hint of what almost seemed like hurt. "She was my high school classmate," he said simply. I nodded, suddenly realizing how little I'd thought about the age gap between us. "So, you're 2 years older than me?" Mike's head snapped up, his expression a mix of disbelief and something I couldn't quite place. "Do you see me as your older brother?" His reaction made me feel strangely guilty, like I'd said something wrong. He took a moment to calm himself, then locked eyes with me, his brows furrowed in determination. "I don't want to be your older brother," he said firmly. There was a pause before he continued, his voice quieter but no less intense. "I want to be your boyfriend." The suddenness of his confession left me completely stunned. But instead of the joy I should have felt, being confessed to by someone as amazing as Mike, what surfaced was fear. Fear of being hurt. Fear of being rejected. Fear that he'd eventually see me as something less than worthy. Mike's gaze never wavered. His eyes, slightly reddened at the edges, seemed to hold an ocean of emotions. Lily always joked that Mike could make even a toilet feel loved with how soulful his eyes were, and right now, he was looking at me with that same overwhelming intensity. I couldn't bring myself to meet his gaze. My eyes darted everywhere but him, and the longer I stayed silent, the more strained his expression became. Finally, he turned his head away, his voice hoarse. "Why?" I didn't have an answer. At least not one I wanted to say out loud. My instincts kicked in, and I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "Because I'm ugly." My words seemed to stun him. Mike turned back toward me, his movements slow and deliberate. I forced myself to lift my hand and push my bangs aside, revealing the scar I'd been hiding all this time. The jagged mark, shaped like a twisted crescent moon, marred my forehead. It was uneven, ugly, and a constant reminder of something I'd rather forget. I mustered a weak, bitter smile. "This is the scar I told you about." My hand trembled as I held my bangs up. I'd never willingly shown anyone this scar before. I hated it, avoided mirrors because of it, and now, here I was, bearing it in some desperate attempt to escape reality. Mike didn't say anything at first, his gaze fixed on me, his eyes filled with a storm of emotions I couldn't decipher. Just when I thought he'd stay silent, he smiled. It wasn't his usual mischievous grin, nor was it the smug smirk he used when teasing. This smile was impossibly soft, gentle, and full of warmth. It was such a stark contrast to his usual persona that it took my breath away. He reached out, his hand cool against my forehead, and I flinched at the touch. But he didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers brushed lightly over the scar, tracing its uneven edges with a tenderness that made my chest ache. "I thought it'd be something terrible," he said, his voice tinged with amusement. "Turns out, you've just been wearing the moon on your forehead." "What?" I blinked, completely caught off guard. Mike chuckled softly, his gaze meeting mine. His eyes were filled with so much affection that it felt like the frozen wasteland of my heart was slowly thawing, coming alive under his warmth. "From now on," he said with a playful tilt of his head, "I'm calling you Little Moon. How about that?" His words, spoken with such ease and sincerity, left me speechless. I could only stare at him, my heart pounding as his smile deepened, his entire focus on me. In that moment, it felt like I was the only thing in his world. Mike insisted on walking me to my dorm building, though we didn't talk much on the way. It was strange. In the past, when people mocked my scar, I'd always felt a rush of anger or defiance, a need to push back. But with Mike's gentle embrace and kind words, I didn't know how to respond. When we reached the dorm entrance, I kept my head down as usual, mumbling a goodbye. Just as I turned to leave, Mike suddenly pulled me into his arms. I froze, startled, but didn't push him away. His voice, clear and warm like a spring breeze, drifted into my ears. "Sorry, the moonlight was too beautiful." I couldn't help but hold it for a moment. Before I could react, he let go, brushing a hand gently over my head. "Good night, Little Moon." Good night," I stammered, my heart pounding wildly as I hurried inside. Once in the safety of my room, I flopped onto my bed and buried myself under the covers, my face burning. Mike's perfect face and the way he said Little Moon kept replaying in my mind, taking root in my thoughts like an unstoppable vine, spreading warmth into the barren corners of my heart. I shook my head, taking deep breaths to calm down. The truth was, my sudden insecurity today had been triggered by seeing Amy and her boyfriend. Amy was everything I wasn't: beautiful, confident, accomplished. And Frank, though I didn't know him well, clearly matched her energy. They were so well suited, the kind of couple that looked like they belonged in a movie. Compared to them, I couldn't help but feel out of place next to Mike. When he confessed, I had instinctively pulled back, thinking that someone as dazzling as him deserved someone equally extraordinary. But Mike had told me I was beautiful. He made me feel like I was worthy of love. As I lay there, the thoughts began to fade, and I drifted off to sleep. That night, I dreamt of memories I didn't want to revisit. I wasn't always scarred. The mark on my forehead came from an accident in middle school, when a sharp piece of glass cut me. The details of that night were a blur. I couldn't even remember the pain, just the overwhelming sight of blood everywhere. When the wound healed, it left a scar. My parents, like everyone else, were just relieved it hadn't been worse, that it hadn't damaged my eye. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was just a scar. But everything changed when school started. The scar's twisted crescent shape, right above my eyebrow, became the subject of cruel nicknames: caterpillar, centipede. Never Little Moon. The dream shifted between scenes. Familiar faces pointed and laughed, their words slicing into me. Others stared at me with judgmental eyes. That was when my social anxiety began. Before the accident, I'd loved public speaking, enjoyed standing on stage. Afterward, I avoided all eyes, hiding behind heavy bangs that shielded my scar and my fragile heart. At first, I tried fighting back against their taunts, but that only made things worse. Their laughter grew louder, more relentless. Eventually, I stopped fighting and resorted to apologizing, even when I wasn't at fault. I became so accustomed to apologizing that it felt automatic. But in the dream, just as I was about to say sorry again, a voice called out. Someone stood in front of me, shielding me. "Little moon," the voice said gently. And suddenly, the dark dream brightened into daylight. For the first time in years, I woke up smiling. It hadn't been a nightmare, it was a beautiful dream. Since that day at the lake, Mike and I had been spending a lot more time together. It felt like he was always around, teasing me, finding ways to make me laugh, or simply being close. We ate together, hung out together, and became almost inseparable. But neither of us ever brought up what had happened that day. Until today. He brought me back to the lake, same spot, same view. Curious, I asked, "Why are we here again?" He tapped me lightly on the forehead and smirked. "We didn't finish what we started last time. Today, we're continuing." I blinked, confused. What hadn't we finished? His confession? My escape? My heart raced. Was he planning to pick up where we left off? I felt a wave of nervousness wash over me, and Mike, ever observant, chuckled. "You're nervous, aren't you?" Trying to save face, I shook my head. "Nope, not at all." But his expression suddenly turned serious as he lowered his gaze to meet mine. "Well, I am." His honesty caught me off guard. I watched as his hand, slightly trembling, moved toward my face. Gently, he brushed aside my bangs, his other hand lightly tracing the crescent-shaped scar on my forehead. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," he said, his voice low but steady. "Thinking about what?" My grip tightened on the fabric of my shirt as I waited, holding my breath. "I heard someone say once that scars are marks left behind by the people who loved us in a past life," he said, smiling softly, his expression impossibly tender. "It's my fault," he continued, his tone almost apologetic. "I must have loved you too much in our last life, and now you're bearing this scar, because of me." His words hit me like a tidal wave. My chest tightened, my vision blurred, and before I knew it, tears were streaming down my face. Mike gently wiped away the tears with his thumb, his voice warm and soothing. "If you have to blame someone, blame me. But don't punish yourself anymore, okay?" Then, he leaned closer, his forehead gently pressing against mine as he whispered, "Let me spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Will you let me?" I couldn't hold back anymore. I broke down, clutching onto him as if letting go would shatter me. For years, I'd carried this weight, this scar, this pain, and the self-loathing that came with it. Even my parents, when they spoke of the accident, would sometimes blame me for being careless. But not Mike. Mike didn't just accept me, he took the burden upon himself, weaving it into a story of love and redemption. For the first time, I felt seen. I felt loved. I sobbed into his chest, letting out all the pain, shame, and insecurity that had festered for so long. Mike held me the entire time, his hand gently patting my back as he whispered, "It's okay. I'm here." When my tears finally subsided, he pressed his forehead to mine again, his breath warm against my skin. Slowly, he placed a delicate kiss on the scar. The touch was so gentle, so reverent, that it sent a wave of warmth through me. For the first time, the scar didn't feel like a burden. He wiped away the last of my tears, and I looked at him, my voice trembling but resolute. "You're my boyfriend now, right?" Mike blinked, momentarily stunned by the question. But then his face lit up in pure joy, a wide grin spreading across his lips. "Of course," he said, his voice brimming with excitement. Before he could say anything else, I grabbed his shirt, pulled him down, and kissed him. His eyes widened in shock, staring at me as if he couldn't believe I'd just done that. Inside, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst, but I kept my composure. "It's a gift," I said, trying to sound cool. "For my boyfriend. Do you like it?" Mike licked his lips, a chuckle escaping as he laughed in sheer delight. Then, without hesitation, he cupped the back of my head and pulled me into another kiss, deeper this time, more certain. "This is my return gift," he whispered against my lips. "For my girlfriend. Do you like it?" I couldn't even find the words to answer. Instead, I nodded, letting his warmth fill every corner of my heart. When I told Lily that Mike and I were officially together, she practically lost her mind. She screamed so loudly, you'd think she was the one who'd just started dating. She kept demanding all the juicy details. Of course, I couldn't tell her everything, some things are just meant to stay private. But ever since we got together, I developed a new favorite pastime, hugging him. Mike was so tall, and I was so short that every time he wrapped his arms around me, I felt warm and safe, like nothing in the world could hurt me. Lily, of course, found this utterly ridiculous. "A guy that handsome, and all you want to do is hug him? You should be thinking about taking things further." I blushed furiously and rushed to cover her mouth, but she dodged with a wicked grin. Then, her tone shifted, and she said, "You know, you're doing great." I blinked. "What do you mean?" She thought for a moment before replying, "You used to feel like you had this heavy weight on your shoulders. You wouldn't look people in the eye and always seemed so timid." She gave me a teasing smile. "But now? You're confident enough to try and shut me up. That's progress." She wasn't wrong. I'd spent so much time hiding behind my insecurities, avoiding interactions, and retreating into the safety of online anonymity. But now, I was learning to engage with the real world, and with real people. I pretended to playfully punch her, and she dodged again. Then she added, "And Mike's changed too, you know." That got my attention. Since we spent so much time together, I hadn't noticed any big changes in him. I was curious. "What do you mean?" I asked. She rolled her eyes dramatically. "You know what I mean. His face. He used to act like he was above it all, so cold and aloof, like nothing mattered to him. But didn't you also say his eyes looked deep and soulful? Like he could make even a toilet feel loved?" I teased, smirking. Lily waved me off. "Okay, true, but he was still intimidating. The kind of guy who seemed like he didn't care about anyone. He looked so unapproachable, granted, still insanely handsome, but scary." I couldn't help but laugh, thinking back to when I first met him. He did have that vibe, but I'd since discovered his smile was one of the kindest things about him. Lily's expression turned dreamy. "But now? The last time he came to pick you up, I saw him smiling at you." Smiling. And not just any smile, it was so gentle. Like, knock you off your feet gentle. I nearly swooned on the spot. I laughed, shaking my head. "You're ridiculous." But her words stayed with me. Mike had been smiling a lot more lately, and he hugged me so often it felt like second nature now. Just as we were laughing, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mike. It wasn't the usual sweet words or teasing comment, though. He wanted me to join him in hosting an upcoming campus event, a casual entertainment night. I froze. The idea of standing on a stage again, under all those watchful eyes, made me want to run. Lily, sensing my hesitation, grabbed my arm. "Hey, you love hosting, don't you? Don't let your fear hold you back." I stared at her, my defenses crumbling under her steady gaze. She wasn't wrong. I'd always loved being on stage, until the scar made me too afraid to face an audience. Just as I was about to type out a polite refusal, another message from Mike popped up. "I'll be with you." Then, a moment later, "Little Moon." I groaned out loud as Lily peered over my shoulder and saw the entire exchange. "Oh, come on," she squealed, smacking my arm. Stop being so cute and just say yes already. With her relentless encouragement and Mike's unwavering support, I finally made up my mind. Maybe Lily was right. Since meeting Mike, I'd become braver in ways I hadn't thought possible. I was still learning to stop running from my fears, but at least now, I was ready to take a step forward. So, I sent Mike a simple reply, "Okay. Let's do it." His response came almost instantly, "I knew you'd say yes." My heart swelled, and for the first time in years, I felt excited to stand in front of an audience again, not because I wasn't afraid, but because I knew he'd be by my side. After deciding to participate in the event, I spent my days rehearsing in empty spaces, practicing lines over and over. But as much as I tried, I couldn't shake my nerves. When I was alone, I could recite everything perfectly, but the moment Mike joined me, my confidence crumbled. To help, Mike came up with a trick. "Don't look into my eyes," he suggested. "Focus on the spot between my eyebrows instead. That'll help you stay calm." I took a deep breath and tried it. After a few rounds, I started to feel more at ease. On my final practice run, I smiled at him as I delivered my lines. This time, I felt flawless, my tone, expressions, everything flowed naturally. But when I finished, Mike just stood there, frozen. Concerned, I stepped closer. "Did I mess up?" I asked. His voice dropped, a little husky, as he waved me over. "Come here," he said softly. Curious, I leaned in, and he suddenly pulled me close, his hand slipping around the back of my neck. "You did great," he murmured, his eyes darkening. "Now let's practice something else." Before I could ask what, he kissed me, firm and unyielding. For a moment, I was too stunned to react. But soon enough, I found myself kissing him back, my heart racing. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine. "The moon is especially sweet tonight. Don't you think?" I knew he was teasing me, so I pretended not to hear him and turned away. "I need to rehearse," I said quickly, avoiding his gaze. Behind me, I heard a soft laugh. "The moon's shy," he muttered to himself. I groaned internally. When had he gotten so good at saying these ridiculously romantic things? Refusing to acknowledge him, I started reciting my script out loud. But he wasn't done. "My moon won't talk to me anymore," he called out, his voice laced with mock sadness. I spun around, clasping my hands together in a gesture of surrender. He burst out laughing, his joy contagious, and soon I was laughing too. After that, I stopped inviting him to my rehearsals, because somehow, they always went off course, and I couldn't afford to let his charm distract me any longer. The night of the event arrived, and the applause was deafening as Mike and I stepped onto the stage together. I wore a formal dress, and he looked dashing in his suit. As we walked out, he discreetly squeezed my hand. Unfortunately, some sharp-eyed classmates caught the gesture and immediately started cheering louder, their playful jeers echoing through the hall. Mike glanced at the audience, but his words were meant for me. "Don't be nervous. I'm here." Strangely, his reassurance worked. I took a deep breath, and just like I'd practiced 100 times in my head, I delivered every line flawlessly. The entire event went without a hitch. When we finished, the crowd erupted into waves of applause. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, and I felt my emotion swell. Mike, noticing my reaction, turned to me with a smile that revealed his sharp little canine teeth. That smile was infectious, I couldn't help but grin back. The audience, still caught up in the post-show excitement, cheered even louder when they saw him smile. Scanning the crowd, I spotted Lily waving at me like a maniac, her face stretched into a grin so wide it looked almost painful. The other students looked just as happy, their faces full of joy, kindness, and encouragement. "Are they clapping for me?" I asked Mike, my voice trembling with disbelief. "They are," he said simply, his gaze steady. "And so am I." My smile widened. "It seems like they really like me." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a tender whisper. "I like you too." A breeze swept through the stage, lifting my bangs and exposing the crescent-shaped scar on my forehead. Under the warm stage lights and surrounded by the applause of my peers, the scar I had hidden for so long finally saw the light of day. That night, the moon on my forehead wasn't a flaw, it was a beacon, shining brightly in a sea of love and acceptance. From that moment on, I no longer hid my moon. In the warmth of love, it flourished, casting its soft, healing glow over the once barren fields of my heart. The end.